Whey protein. It's practically everywhere you look these days,
Oh,
right?
absolutely.
Tubs at the gym, protein shakes fueling athletes, mentioned in countless diet articles online. It's huge in the supplement world.
Yeah, you really can't avoid it if you're interested in fitness or even just general health.
But beyond the marketing and the anecdotes from people at the gym, what does the real, hard, high-quality science actually say about its effects on your health and your physical performance?
Right.
Is it just for building bigger muscles, or does it have broader implications for your overall well-being?
Those are exactly the right questions to ask,
Yeah.
because the hype around popular supplements often runs, well, far ahead of what the robust scientific evidence actually confirms.
Mm-hmm.
And that's precisely why a deep dive like this is so valuable, to really cut through the noise and look at what the best available data tells us.
Absolutely. So today we're doing just that. We're taking a deep dive into a stack of very recent, very high-quality scientific sources.
Yeah, these aren't just single studies.
No, exactly. We're talking about systematic reviews and meta-analyses. These are powerful pieces of research that meticulously pull together the findings from many individual studies.
Giving us a much clearer, more reliable picture of the combined evidence. It's about looking at the forest, not just the individual trees.
Well put. So our mission today is to unpack what this comprehensive body of work reveals about whey protein supplementation across some key areas of health and performance.
And our source tech covers some really crucial ground. We have material drawing on research into whey protein's impact on important cardiometabolic health markers.
Things like cholesterol levels, triglycerides, the stuff vital for long-term heart health.
Exactly. And then we also have sources that specifically delve into its effects on athletic performance parameters and body composition.
Right, thinking about things like how much fat you carry versus how much muscle you have, the classic goals for many people. So our goal is to pull out the most important, actionable insights from these extensive reviews. We'll look at what effects were consistently found, under what specific conditions those effects appeared.
Yeah, and who seem to benefit most.
Right, and critically, what the limitations and the gaps are in the current research. Because no research is perfect, right?
Never. Understanding the limits is just as important as understanding the findings.
So think of this as your shortcut to being genuinely well-informed on the scientific standing of whey protein supplementation, grounded in the strongest available evidence.
And hopefully we'll stumble upon a few surprising facts that might challenge some common assumptions along the way.
I'm looking forward to that. Okay, let's dive in. And I want to start with something that impacts pretty much everyone, regardless of whether they're hitting the gym 5 days a week or not. Cardiometabolic health. Why is this such a critical area for us to understand?
Well, cardiometabolic health is just foundational to overall well-being. I mean, the risk factors involved here are major drivers of some of the most serious chronic diseases worldwide.
We're talking heart disease, diabetes.
Exactly. Type 2 diabetes, cardiovascular disease.
Yeah.
And the risk factors are things many people have heard of. Obesity, high blood pressure, insulin resistance, unhealthy levels of blood lipids like cholesterol and triglycerides. These aren't just, abstract clinical terms. They profoundly affect quality of life. And they're huge contributors to increased mortality and massive healthcare costs globally.
Yeah, the burden is enormous.
It really is. Our source actually highlights the scale of the problem, like, for example, hypertension rates in adults have apparently doubled in the last 30 years.
Doubled. Wow.
Yeah, and millions upon millions worldwide are living with type 2 diabetes. So finding practical, accessible strategies to help manage these risks is incredibly important. Urgent, really.
And diet is always a central piece of managing these risks, isn't it? We hear a lot about increasing fiber intake, managing calorie balance for weight, choosing unsaturated fats.
All crucial, absolutely.
But our source suggests that whey protein might be another component to consider in this complex picture.
Exactly. The systematic review and meta-analysis we're digging into here specifically set out to quantify the effects of whey protein ingestion on the cardiometabolic profile in adults.
Okay.
And it does this by rigorously pooling data from multiple randomized controlled trials, which, as you know, is one of the strongest types of study designs for understanding cause and effect.
Right, the RCTs, the gold standard, basically. Let's briefly touch on how they actually conducted this deep dive into the cardiometabolic data. How did they gather and analyze these studies? What was the process?
Sure. So they performed a really comprehensive search across major scientific literature databases. Think of them as the world's biggest libraries for published research, like PubMed, Web of Science, Scopus.
The big one.
The big ones, yeah. And they searched everything up until June 2024, so it's very up-to-date information.
And they weren't just grabbing any study mentioning whey protein, right? They had specific criteria.
Precisely. They focused only on randomized controlled trials, the RCTs we mentioned. Participants had to be adult, 18 or older. The whey protein intervention itself had to last at least 4 weeks, so not just a one-off dose.
Right, looking for more sustained effects.
Exactly. And for a fair comparison, the control group had to receive either a placebo, like a dummy supplement, or a carbohydrate-based control.
Okay, so comparing it to something neutral or just carbs?
Yes. And crucially, they were careful to ensure that if the whey group was doing something extra, like maybe following a specific exercise program.
Which often happens in these studies.
It does. Then the control group had to do the exact same extra thing.
Ah, okay. So you're isolating the effect of the whey itself, not the whey plus exercise versus doing nothing.
Correct. Trying to level the playing field to pinpoint the whey effect as much as possible.
Makes sense. So they tried to control for other factors, and they also looked at the quality of the studies they actually found. Did they assess if the studies themselves were well conducted?
Yes, absolutely critical. They used a standard tool. It's called the Cochrane Risk of Bias 2 tool, or ROB2, and that helps assess potential methodological flaws in each included study. Things like, how were participants assigned to groups? Was it truly random? Was there missing data? Could the results have been influenced by how they were measured?
Gotcha. So it helps you gauge how much confidence to put in each study's findings.
Exactly. And this assessment helps us understand how reliable the overall pooled findings are. They also looked at something called statistical heterogeneity, using a measure called I-squared.
I-squared. What's that tell us?
Basically, it tells you how much the results varied between the included studies. So if one study found a big effect and another found a small effect, or even no effect, the heterogeneity would be higher.
Okay.
A high I-squared value, say 75% or more, means the results were pretty different across studies.
Which means you have to be more careful interpreting the average result, right? Because it might not represent all the studies equally well.
Precisely. It signals that maybe other factors are influencing the results in different studies, which requires a more careful interpretation of that pooled average.
And they didn't just average everything together for one big number. They broke down the data by different factors, too. Subgroup analyses.
Yes, they did subgroup analyses. This is really important for getting a more nuanced understanding. It allows them to see if the effects of whey protein differ based on things like, was it combined with exercise? What was the age of the participants? Were they younger, older?
Duration, too, maybe? Like short-term versus long-term.
Yep. Duration of supplementation, less than 12 weeks versus 12 weeks or more. The dose used lower versus higher. The participants' body mass index, their BMI, were they leaner or overweight? And even the type of control group used.
Wow, okay, so that really lets you slice the data to see where the effects are strongest or if they disappear under certain conditions.
Exactly. This is how we move beyond a simple does it work to for whom does it work and under what conditions.
Okay, let's get to the heart of it then. After pooling the data from the 21 RCTs that met all their criteria, what did this big meta-analysis reveal about those key lipoprotein markers like cholesterol and triglycerides?
All right, looking at the lipid profile, the findings were quite specific, quite nuanced, actually. First off, the meta-analysis found that overall, whey protein supplementation did not have a statistically significant effect on HDL cholesterol concentration.
HDL, that's the good cholesterol, right?
That's the one. And the combined evidence, looking across all these studies, didn't show a notable impact on raising HDL levels.
Okay, so no significant boost to the good stuff. What about LDL, the bad cholesterol? That's often a primary target for reducing cardiovascular risk.
Here, they did observe a reduction, and this is critical. It was under very specific conditions.
Ah, okay. Tell me more.
The analysis found a statistically significant reduction in LDL cholesterol only in individuals who were aged less than 50 years.
Younger adults.
Younger adults, yes. And specifically when the whey protein supplementation was combined with exercise.
Ah, the exercise combination again.
Exactly. The mean reduction they saw here was about 5.38 milli-OGL. Now, what's particularly compelling about this specific finding is the very low statistical heterogeneity they found in this subgroup. It was I-squared equals 0%.
0. Wow. So that means the studies looking at younger, exercising people taking whey consistently showed this LDL reduction.
Highly consistent, yes. That low heterogeneity really strengthens the confidence in that particular finding for that specific group.
Okay, so for younger folks under 50 who are exercising, adding whey might offer a benefit for lowering their LDL. What about total cholesterol? Did that follow a similar pattern?
Total cholesterol also showed a reduction, and again, primarily when the whey protein supplementation was combined with exercise.
Okay.
The mean reduction there was a bit larger, around 8.58 milli-EDL. The heterogeneity here was moderate, though, about 55%.
So still a reduction linked to exercise, but maybe a bit more variability between the studies compared to the LDL finding.
Exactly. They also saw a reduction in total cholesterol when they looked specifically at participants with a BMI of 25 or greater in the overweight or obese category.
Oh, interesting. Regardless of exercise for that group.
The paper notes that finding for BMI equals 25, irrespective of some other factors, but the heterogeneity in that particular subgroup was high, around 74%.
Ah, okay. So high variability there makes it harder to draw a firm conclusion just based on BMI alone, maybe? But the exercise link seems more consistent for total cholesterol reduction overall.
The exercise combination definitely seems to be a recurring theme for seeing benefits in both LDL and total cholesterol based on this analysis.
Okay. And triglycerides, those are the fats circulating in the blood. What did the analysis show there?
Well, the initial overall analysis for triglycerides, looking at all studies combined, showed no significant effect.
Oh, okay. So nothing there.
Not initially. However, when they performed a subgroup analysis based on the duration of the supplementation,
Ah, okay. Duration mattered.
it seemed to. They found that taking whey protein for 12 weeks or longer was associated with reduced triglyceride levels.
Longer term use.
Yes, the mean difference was a reduction of about 6.61 milli-GDL.
Okay.
But like some of the other findings, the heterogeneity here was also high, around 70%.
So again, while longer duration seems to be the key condition for seeing a triglyceride reduction, the actual amount of reduction varied quite a bit across those longer studies.
That's right. It suggests duration is important, but other factors might be influencing the magnitude of the effect in different study populations or contexts.
It really sounds like these benefits aren't universal at all. They really depend on the person, what else they're doing, like exercising, and maybe how long they stick with it. Was there a really striking insight about who specifically benefits most from these lipid changes?
Yes, and this is one of those crucial nuances that really comes out when you pool the data like this. While they observed these reductions in LDL, total cholesterol, and triglycerides under certain specific conditions,
Yep.
the study authors explicitly note that these positive changes were primarily displayed in healthy adults.
Primarily in healthy adults. Okay, that's a critical distinction. So not necessarily in people who already have metabolic issues.
That seems to be the implication from their analysis. For instance, when they look specifically at that triglyceride effect we just discussed.
The one seen with longer duration.
Yes. The mean difference for healthy adults showed a reduction of 8.20 mg/dL, which is, a decent drop.
Okay.
But contrast that with the subgroup analysis they did for individuals who were classified as having overweight or obesity. In that group, the mean difference was actually an increase of 2.15 mg/dL.
Wait, an increase in triglycerides for the group with overweight or obesity?
Based on the pooled data from the studies looking at that specific subgroup, yes.
Wow. So someone who's already perhaps struggling with their weight or metabolic health might not see the triglyceride benefits seen in healthy individuals, and might even, based on this data, see the opposite. That's really counterintuitive, isn't it? Especially for something often marketed for metabolic health support.
It is quite counterintuitive, and it really highlights the complexity.
Why do the authors think that might be happening? What's the potential explanation?
They speculate on several possibilities, and it really underscores how tricky nutrition research can be, especially when comparing different populations. One potential issue they raise relates to differences in overall energy intake across the studies they included.
Ah, calorie balance.
Right. They noted one specific study they examined where the control group actually ended up consuming fewer calories overall and saw their triglycerides go down, while the whey group consumed more calories. So differences in total calories could confound the results.
Okay, that makes sense. If the whey group is eating more overall, that could offset any potential benefit.
Potentially. Also, in populations who already have overweight or obesity, there might be underlying metabolic dysfunctions, maybe insulin resistance, for example, that influence how their bodies handle different nutrients, including protein and the fats they consume.
So the baseline metabolic state matters a lot.
It likely does. Another area they touched on involves specific bioactive compounds sometimes found in whey protein, like glycomacropeptide. They mentioned some preliminary research, I think it was in mouse models on a high-fat diet, where this compound didn't show positive effects on certain fats. So it suggests that simply translating findings from healthy individuals, or even from animal models, to humans with existing metabolic challenges isn't straightforward at all. Factors like the overall diet, the total calorie intake, individual metabolic health, they all play a huge role.
That really drives home the point that whey isn't some kind of magic bullet, especially not for everyone, and context is absolutely key. What were the main limitations or caveats the researchers themselves highlighted about these cardiometabolic findings? What should we be cautious about?
They pointed out several important points to keep in mind. Firstly, the primary studies they included had a lot of variability, heterogeneity in the frequency, intensity, and types of exercise performed alongside the whey protein.
Right, we talked about exercise being important for some benefits, but if the exercise itself varied wildly.
Exactly. It makes it really difficult to precisely understand that synergistic effect. How much of the benefit was directly from the whey? How much was from the exercise? How exactly did they interact? It's hard to tease apart with inconsistent exercise protocols.
So more standardized exercise in future studies would help clarify that.
Definitely. They explicitly call for more standardized exercise protocols in future research.
Okay, what else?
Secondly, a common limitation in protein research, and it was present here too, is the lack of a robust protein control in many studies.
Meaning they compared whey to carbs or placebo, but not often to other types of protein.
Correct. Many included studies didn't compare whey to other protein sources like casein or soy protein, or even just a mixed protein meal providing the same amount of protein.
Why is that comparison important?
Because it makes it hard to determine if the observed effects, like the LDL reduction, are unique to whey protein-specific properties. Maybe it's rapid absorption or its specific amino acid profile, or if they're simply the result of increasing overall protein intake, regardless of the source.
Ah, I see. Maybe just getting enough protein overall is the key, especially with exercise rather than whey specifically.
It's a possibility that this analysis couldn't definitively rule out. Different dietary proteins can have different effects on metabolic markers, but without direct comparisons within the studies, this meta-analysis couldn't settle that question for whey versus other proteins.
And dosage variation was also an issue you mentioned.
Yes, the studies used a wide range of whey protein dosages. Some use maybe 20 grams a day, others much more.
Which makes it hard for someone listening to know how much they should actually take if they wanted to try and get these effects.
Exactly. It makes it difficult to recommend an optimal dose based solely on this analysis for achieving these specific cardiometabolic benefits. It leaves open questions about practicality and, cost effectiveness too.
Yeah, definitely.
And finally, it's really worth reiterating that while some of those lipid markers, like LDL and triglycerides, showed conditional improvements under specific circumstances, this meta-analysis found no clinically relevant effect of whey protein supplementation on blood pressure.
Okay, no impact on blood pressure.
And no clinically relevant effect on HOMA-IR, which is a common measure used to estimate insulin resistance.
So no significant improvement in insulin sensitivity either, based on this data.
Correct. So while it might help with certain cholesterol numbers under specific conditions, particularly in healthy, exercising individuals, it didn't appear to have a broad, significant impact on other crucial cardiometabolic risk factors like blood pressure or insulin sensitivity in this large pool of evidence.
Okay, so pulling that together for cardiometabolic health. The takeaway is pretty nuanced. There's potential condition-dependent benefits for some lipids lowering LDL and total cholesterol if combined with exercise, and especially if you're younger and healthy. Maybe lower triglycerides if you take it for 12 weeks or more.
Right, but those benefits seem most evident in healthy folks.
And crucially, no significant impact found on blood pressure or insulin sensitivity in this analysis. Plus, we need to remember the limitations the exercise wasn't standardized, not enough comparison to other proteins.
Exactly. It's potential support, not a primary solution. And context matters hugely.
Okay, let's transition then. Let's shift gears to what many people immediately think of when they hear whey protein: physical performance and changing body composition.
Back to the gym stuff.
Yeah, exactly. Can whey actually help you lift heavier, run faster, or shift your body weight towards more muscle and less fat? This is probably why most people buy it.
This is where we turn to two other significant sources we looked at, focusing specifically on these outcomes, often in populations who are already physically active or athletes. And spoiler alert, the findings here also have their own set of conditions and nuances. No simple answers here either.
I'm sensing a theme. Okay, let's start with athletic performance itself. One of these sources used something called a network meta-analysis to look at vital signs and power output. Sounds quite powerful as a research method.
It is, yeah. A network meta-analysis is a really neat statistical tool. It doesn't just compare, say, supplement A to a placebo. It builds a whole network.
How does that work?
It takes all the studies that compared various interventions. Maybe study 1 compared Whey to placebo, study 2 compared Whey to casein, study 3 compared casein to placebo, and it uses statistical techniques to allow comparisons across the entire network.
Ah, so you can compare Whey versus casein even if no single study directly compared them head-to-head as long as they were both compared to something else, like placebo.
Exactly. It leverages both direct and indirect evidence to rank the different interventions relative to each other. So this specific one looked at the efficacy and safety of whey protein supplements on vital signs and physical performance, specifically in athletes, comparing it to a range of other things.
Okay, cool. So what did this network analysis find regarding basic physiological measures during exercise, like heart rate? Did Whey make a difference there compared to other supplements or placebo?
Looking at vital signs like exercise heart rate, the network meta-analysis found only small, non-significant differences between whey protein and the various other supplements they compared it to, things like L-alanine, bovine colostrum, carbohydrates, casein, leucine, maltodextrin, or placebo.
So pretty much no difference in heart rate response during exercise.
Not a statistically significant one based on the network analysis. The review does mention, kind of an aside, that whey's characteristic rapid absorption might potentially contribute to performance simply by aiding quicker fluid and nutrient uptake. And they cited some individual studies that had shown potentially slower heart rates with whey compared to just carbohydrates, maybe due to better hydration or something. But overall, when pooling everything in the network, no big difference was found for heart rate.
Gotcha. What about the respiratory exchange ratio, RER? You mentioned that before. It tells us about fuel use, right? Carbs versus fats.
Yes, RE gives an indication of whether your body is primarily burning carbohydrates, which results in a higher RER, closer to 1.0, or fats, which gives a lower RER, closer to 0.7 for energy during exercise.
And what did the review find about Whey's effect on RER?
This review found that whey protein supplementation was slightly favorable towards a higher RER compared to the other comparators in the network.
Higher RER. So leaning more towards burning carbohydrates?
That's the interpretation, yes. And this difference reached statistical significance specifically when whey was compared to maltodextrin, which is just a simple carbohydrate.
So taking Whey led to slightly more carbohydrate burning compared to taking maltodextrin. Why might that be?
The authors suggest this might indicate potentially better energy generation from carbohydrates when whey is consumed, perhaps due to its effects on insulin or other metabolic factors. But it was a relatively small difference.
Okay. What about VO2 max? That's kind of the classic measure of aerobic fitness, maximum oxygen uptake. How did Whey compare for improving that?
Right. VO2 max is often seen as a key indicator of endurance capacity. In this network meta-analysis, they found that bovine colostrum actually had the highest rank for improving VO2 max.
Oh, not Whey.
Not whey, according to their ranking. But, and this is important, the overall differences between whey, other supplements, and placebo for improving VO2 max were not statistically significant.
So even though colostrum ranked highest, the difference between it and Whey or even placebo wasn't big enough to be statistically meaningful in this analysis.
Correct. Interestingly, placebo also ranked quite high in their network analysis for this specific outcome, VO2 max.
Placebo ranked high. That's surprising.
It can happen in these analyses, especially if the effects of the active supplements are small or inconsistent. While some individual studies mentioned in the review might have found whey comparable to colostrum or showing no difference over longer durations, the combined network evidence didn't show a clear, statistically significant advantage for whey over placebo or other comparators specifically for boosting VO2 max.
Great. And they noted high variability here, too.
Yes, there was high heterogeneity in some of the comparisons involving VO2 max, for example. When comparing whey protein to maltodextrin, the I-squared was very high, like 97.8%.
Wow, yeah. So lots of variation in those results. Okay, so maybe not a huge effect on max aerobic capacity based on this network analysis, but what about something more directly related to, say, explosive effort or sustained power during exercise?
This is where we see a potentially more significant finding emerging from this particular review.
Okay.
While maximum power, like the absolute peak power you can generate in one go, didn't show statistically significant differences when comparing whey to other things in the network. The analysis revealed that whey protein was the highest ranked intervention for average power output during exercise.
Average power. Not peak power, but average power. What does that mean exactly?
Average power refers more to the power you can sustain over repeated efforts or during a bout of continuous high-intensity exercise. It's less about that single absolute maximum and more about your ability to keep generating power over time within an exercise session.
Okay, I see. Maintaining intensity.
Exactly. And whey protein ranked highest for this, with a SUCRA score that's a way to rank treatments in a network meta-analysis of 75.4%.
And was this difference statistically significant compared to placebo or carbs?
Yes, it was. The analysis showed that whey protein resulted in significantly higher average power compared to both carbohydrate supplementation and placebo. The confidence intervals for these comparisons did not cross zero, indicating statistical significance.
Okay, higher average power compared to carbs or placebo. That sounds like a tangible, real performance benefit, doesn't it?
The evidence from this network review certainly suggests it is, specifically for average power output during exercise.
What kind of activities might that be relevant for? Team sports? Interval training?
Potentially, yes. Anything involving repeated sprints, high-intensity intervals, or needing to maintain a high work rate over several minutes or efforts. The review actually cites some individual studies that support this finding. For example, one study showed improved multiple sprint running performance when athletes co-ingested carbohydrates and protein, which could include whey.
Okay.
Another study they mentioned found better recovery and higher average power managed by athletes who consumed whey compared to a placebo group. So, for activities where sustaining power is important, this finding on average power is quite relevant and seems supported by some underlying studies too.
Interesting. So a potential edge for maintaining power output. Okay, that covers performance aspects. Now let's tackle what might be the most common reason people reach for whey. Changing their body composition. Losing fat or gaining muscle.
Right, the classic body recomposition goals. This is where the third systematic review and meta-analysis we examined becomes particularly valuable. It had very strict criteria, specifically aimed at isolating the effect of whey protein on body composition itself.
Okay, and what was its focus?
It specifically compared different forms of whey protein like concentrate, isolate, hydrolyzation, only to isocaloric placebos.
Isocaloric meaning same calorie.
Exactly, same calorie count in the placebo as in the whey supplement. And they looked at the impact on fat-free mass, FFM, which includes muscle and fat mass, FM, specifically in healthy, non-sedentary adults.
Okay, isocaloric placebo is key there, comparing it to something with the same energy value. And you mentioned strict criteria. Tell us more about how rigorous they were with selecting studies for this one.
They were very rigorous. As you said, only RCTs in healthy, non-sedentary adults aged 1860. A really key requirement was that body composition had to be measured using highly accurate, what we call gold standard methods.
Like what? What counts as gold standard?
Things like DXA scans dual energy X-ray absorptiometry, which gives detailed bone, fat, and lean mass readings, or hydrostatic weighing, which involves being weighed underwater, or body plethysmography, sometimes called the BOD-POD.
Okay, the really precise lab-based methods.
Exactly. They specifically excluded studies that use less precise methods like skin fold calipers, which could be prone to more error.
Gotcha. What else?
Crucially, the whey protein intervention group could only be taking whey protein. They excluded studies where whey was combined with other common supplements like creatine or HMB.
Ah, so trying to isolate the whey effect again, not a stack effect.
Precisely. And as we mentioned, the comparison group had to receive an isocaloric placebo, same calories, usually from carbohydrates like maltodextrin. This is essential to rule out the possibility that any changes observed were simply due to the whey group consuming extra calories compared to the placebo group.
Right. You want to know it's the whey itself or just the extra energy?
Exactly. They also excluded studies where all groups were doing extra parallel interventions beyond just the supplement comparison to keep it clean.
Wow, those are some tough filters. A lot of studies probably got excluded based on those criteria, I imagine.
They did. It narrows the pool considerably, but the goal is to get the highest quality comparison possible for this specific question.
So after applying all those strict rules, how many studies and participants actually made it into their final meta-analysis?
After applying all their criteria, they ended up including 8 RCTs in the final meta-analysis. These 8 studies totaled 246 participants, 150 in the whey groups, and 136 in the placebo groups.
Okay, 8 studies, 246 people. Not a huge number, but highly filtered.
Right. And there's an absolutely critical point to understand about this specific meta-analysis and the studies it included.
What's that?
All 8 of the RCTs included in this final analysis were conducted only in men.
All of them. Only men.
Yes. every single one.
Wow, okay, that is a major limitation then. It means we absolutely cannot draw direct conclusions about the effects of whey protein on body composition in women based solely on this particular highly filtered analysis.
That's exactly right. The authors highlight this themselves. It's a significant gap in the research they were able to pull using these strict criteria.
Okay, really important caveat for our listeners, especially female listeners. So keeping in mind this strict filtering process, the use of gold standard methods, the comparison to an isocaloric placebo, and the fact that the participants in these 8 studies were all male. What did this analysis find regarding fat mass and fat-free mass?
All right, let's look at fat mass FM first. The meta-analysis found a statistically significant loss of fat mass with whey protein supplementation compared to the isocaloric placebo group.
A significant fat loss. Okay, how much?
The weighted mean difference was a loss of 0.96 kilograms. So on average, the men taking whey lost almost a kilogram more fat than the men taking the calorie-matched placebo over the course of these studies.
Nearly a kilo more fat loss, and
Yeah.
that was statistically significant.
Yes, highly statistically significant, p 0.0001. And they also did a sensitivity analysis, where they removed each study one by one to see if the result depended heavily on any single study.
Fair.
And the overall result remained robust.
Yeah.
It didn't change significantly, which increases confidence in that overall finding for fat mass loss in this group.
Okay, so compared to a calorie-matched placebo, whey did seem to help with fat loss, at least in these studies conducted in men. Did the type of whey protein used or its protein content make a difference for that fat loss effect?
They looked at that in subgroup analyses. The significant fat mass loss effect was maintained specifically for studies using whey protein concentrate, WPC,
WPC.
and also for products that had a protein content falling between 51% and 80%.
Interesting. So not necessarily needing the super high percentage isolates for the fat loss effect seen here.
Based on these subgroup analyses, it seemed the effect was present with standard concentrates in that protein range.
Okay. And what about physical activity? We saw exercise was important for the cholesterol findings. Did being active influence the fat loss effect here too?
Yes, this was another really critical finding from this particular review. The significant fat mass loss, that nearly 1 kilogram difference, was observed only in the subgroup of participants who were classified as regular physical activity practitioners.
Only in the regular exercisers.
That's what their subgroup analysis showed. The weighted mean difference for fat loss in this regularly active group was -0.95 kilograms, and it was statistically significant.
What about the guys who weren't exercising as much, the ones classified differently?
Participants who were classified as sporadic or recreational practitioners, so maybe exercising less consistently or intensely, did not show a statistically significant difference in fat mass loss between the whey protein group and the placebo group. The mean difference was similar, meaning of 0.92 kilograms, but the confidence interval crossed 0, meaning it wasn't statistically significant for that less active group.
Wow. Okay, so that strongly suggests that having a consistent, regular training routine might be necessary, or at least synergistic, to actually see this fat loss benefit from whey protein when compared directly to just consuming the same number of calories from a placebo like carbs.
That's exactly the implication. It suggests the whey might enhance fat loss achieved through regular training, but perhaps doesn't cause significant fat loss on its own in less active individuals compared to just calories.
Okay, that's a very important piece of context. So significant fat loss benefit, particularly if you're consistently active. Now for the big question, the one most associated with whey. Fat-free mass, FFM,
Right.
This includes muscle mass. What did this rigorous analysis find about gaining muscle with whey versus the isocaloric placebo?
Here, within the very strict constraints and methodology of this specific meta-analysis, the findings were quite different from the fat mass results.
Okay.
The pooled analysis found no statistically significant effect of whey protein supplementation on fat-free mass gain in any of the scenarios they investigated.
No significant effect on muscle gain at all.
Not statistically significant, no. This was true when looking at the overall global analysis across all 8 studies, and it was also true when they looked within any of the subgroups they analyzed, whether they broke it down by the type of whey used, the protein percentage of the product, or the physical activity level of the participants.
So even in the regular exercisers, they didn't find a significant FFM gain with whey compared to the calorie-matched placebo in this specific analysis.
According to their pooled results from these 8 studies in men, no statistically significant difference was detected for FFM gain, even in the regularly active subgroup.
Wow. Okay, so just to be crystal clear, This specific rigorous meta-analysis, which used gold standard body composition methods, compared whey only to an isocaloric placebo, and included only studies done in men, found a significant benefit for fat loss, especially in regular exercisers, but did not find a significant benefit for muscle gain compared to the placebo.
That is the summary of the primary findings report in this particular paper, yes.
That seems to flag directly in the face of, well, decades of marketing and common assumptions about whey protein being the king of muscle builders. What do the authors themselves make of that finding? And crucially, what are the limitations we need to keep firmly in mind when interpreting this specific result about muscle gain?
That's precisely the tension, isn't it? On the surface, it absolutely contradicts the popular narrative. However, it is absolutely vital to understand the limitations, both of the meta-analysis itself and perhaps even more critically, of the underlying primary studies it was able to include, even after applying their strict criteria.
Okay, so the underlying studies themselves might be part of the issue.
Yes. The authors point out several key issues here. First, they highlighted the generally low methodological quality and often poor reporting in many of the primary studies they analyzed.
Even the ones that use the gold standard body comp methods.
Yes. Using a good measurement tool doesn't guarantee the rest of the study was perfect. They noted issues like inconsistent reporting or assessment of the participants' overall dietary intake outside of the supplement.
So maybe the whey group and placebo group were eating differently in ways that weren't captured.
It's a potential confounder. Also, varying definitions of physical activity across studies and often poor reporting on adherence. Did people actually take the supplement consistently? Did they follow the exercise protocol? These kinds of reporting failures can all introduce bias and variability into the results.
Okay, so the quality of the input data was maybe not ideal, even if the methods looked good on paper.
That was a major concern they raised. Second, and we absolutely have to emphasize this again, the fact that all the studies included in this meta-analysis were conducted only on men.
Right. Cannot stress that enough.
We simply cannot apply these specific FFM findings, or lack thereof, directly to women. Hormonal differences, training responses, metabolic responses to protein could all be different. It's a massive gap.
Okay, so no conclusions about women from this. What else?
They also noted variability in how the dose of whey protein was reported in the studies. Sometimes it was just a flat dose, like 30 grams. Other times maybe per kilogram of body weight, but not always consistently.
Which makes it hard to compare dose response across studies.
Exactly. And they also pointed out wide inconsistencies in nutrient timing.
When people took the supplement.
Yes. When was the whey or placebo consumed relative to the exercise sessions or relative to other meals? Both the dose and the timing of protein intake are factors thought to potentially influence muscle protein synthesis and the adaptations to training.
Right, the whole anabolic window idea, although that's debated too.
It is debated, but timing might matter, especially in the context of maximizing muscle response. The lack of standardization in dose reporting and timing protocols across these studies makes it really hard to draw firm conclusions about the impact of these factors on FFM gained from this pooled data.
Okay, so the takeaway here isn't necessarily a definitive statement that whey never helps with muscle gain compared to other calories. It's more that this specific, highly filtered meta-analysis, based on the available studies, which were all male, often had methodological weaknesses despite using good body comp tools and lacked standardization in dose and timing.
Right.
Didn't detect a statistically significant advantage for FFM gain when compared directly to an isocaloric placebo.
Exactly. That is the crucial nuance. The authors are very careful about this. They strongly emphasize that their findings on FFM gain are constrained by these significant limitations of the underlying research base they had to work with.
So they aren't saying whey is useless for muscle.
No, they're not definitively saying whey doesn't help FFM gain in all contexts. They're saying that based on the combined data from these specific filtered studies, a statistically significant advantage for FFM gain compared to a calorie-matched placebo was not detected.
Okay.
And they explicitly call for much higher quality, more standardized research in the future, particularly studies that include female participants that use standardized dose reporting, like grams per kg body weight, that implement consistent nutrient timing protocols, and that rigorously monitor and report overall diet and physical activity levels.
So better quality studies are needed to get a clearer picture on the FFM question, especially comparing whey directly to isocaloric controls.
Absolutely. They did make one other point worth mentioning. Across the included studies, adverse effects from the whey protein were rarely reported, and when they were generally minor gastrointestinal things, not significant issues.
So it seemed generally well tolerated, at least within these research settings.
Yes, that was the impression from the included studies. Good tolerability for most people.
Okay, wow. That was a really deep dive into a lot of detailed findings from 3 different comprehensive sources. Let's try to pull it all together now. Let's synthesize the key threads and figure out the big takeaways for our listener.
Okay, yeah, let's unpack this and try to see the bigger picture. Synthesizing the findings from these different systematic reviews and meta-analyses definitely provides a more nuanced view of whey protein's effects. It really moves us beyond those simple yes or no answers.
So first, for cardiometabolic health, what's the bottom line there?
The evidence suggests whey protein can potentially offer some help with improving certain aspects of your lipoprotein profile. Specifically, it might help reduce LDL cholesterol.
The bad kind.
Right. Particularly if you're younger, say under 50, and you're combining it with exercise. It might also help reduce total cholesterol, again, especially when combined with exercise.
Okay.
And there's also a potential benefit for reducing triglycerides, but that seemed to require longer-term supplementation, like 12 weeks or more.
But a big caveat here.
A very big caveat. These potential lipid benefits seemed most consistent and most pronounced in adults who were already considered healthy at baseline. The triglyceride benefit, for example, wasn't apparent and might even have been reversed in the subgroup with overweight or obesity.
Right. And what about other cardiometabolic factors?
Importantly, the analysis didn't find clinically significant effects of whey on improving blood pressure or on improving insulin resistance based on the UMNAR measure.
Okay. And we have to remember the limitations too, right?
Absolutely. The variability in the exercise protocols used across the studies makes it hard to pin down the exact exercise contribution. And the lack of consistent comparison to other protein sources means we can't definitively say these effects are unique to whey itself versus just being a result of increasing overall protein intake alongside exercise.
So for heart health markers, potential conditional help for some lipids in healthy exercising folks, but not a magic bullet, and limited impact on blood pressure or insulin sensitivity in this data.
That sums it up pretty well.
Okay. Now, for performance and body composition, what are the key takeaways here for active people or athletes?
All right, here the evidence suggests whey protein supplementation seems effective for helping with fat mass loss.
Okay, the fat loss findings seemed quite robust.
It did, especially in the rigorous analysis comparing it to an isocaloric placebo. But critically, that significant fat loss was seen particularly if you were already training regularly and consistently. It wasn't significant in the less active groups in that analysis.
Gotcha. Fat loss benefit, but tied to regular training. What about muscle gain, the FFM?
This is where it's more complex. That same strict analysis, the one comparing whey only to an isocaloric placebo using gold standard methods in men, did not find a statistically significant effect on increasing fat-free mass or muscle on its own compared to the placebo.
Right, the controversial finding.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But we have to immediately follow that with the major caveats, the generally low quality and inconsistencies of the underlying studies they could include, and the complete lack of female participants in that specific FFM meta-analysis. So it doesn't close the book on whey and muscle, but it highlights the need for better research comparing it fairly to just calories.
Okay, but what about actual performance? Did whey help there?
Yes. Importantly, the performance-focused network meta-analysis found a significant benefit for increasing average power output during exercise.
Average power, right, maintaining intensity.
Exactly. It ranked highest for that outcome and was significantly better than both carbohydrate and placebo for average power.
So a potential performance edge there.
That seems like it. For other things, like vital signs, heart rate, or VO2 max, it appeared generally comparable to other supplements or placebo in the network analysis. No significant disadvantage, but no clear advantage either.
And safety.
Generally, it seems well tolerated across these reviews, with few significant adverse effects reported in the studies included.
Okay, so for active folks, good evidence for supporting fat loss if you train regularly, potential boost in average power output, but the jury is still out based on the specific rigorous analysis on whether it provides a muscle-building advantage over just consuming the same calories from other sources, especially given the research limitations.
That's a fair summary of the nuances across these reviews.
So what does all this mean for you, the listener? If you're thinking about using whey protein, or maybe you already are, how do you translate these complex findings into practical choices for yourself?
Yeah, that's the key question, isn't it? I think it means understanding that whey protein isn't some kind of universal cure-all or guaranteed muscle builder, and its effectiveness really is very context-dependent.
Depends on your goals and your situation.
Exactly. So if you're a generally healthy individual and maybe looking for some support for your lipid markers, especially if you're also exercising consistently, then whey protein might be a helpful dietary addition. But it shouldn't be seen as a primary treatment for existing metabolic conditions based on this evidence.
Okay.
If your main goal is fat loss, and particularly if you're already committed to and maintaining a consistent training routine, then these reviews provide pretty solid evidence that whey protein can support that goal, even when compared to just getting the same calories from carbs.
So for the dedicated exerciser looking to lean out, it seems helpful.
The evidence points that way. Now, if you're an athlete or someone really focused on performance, it seems like a reliable option that could potentially help boost your average power output during training or competition. And it supports those body composition goals like fat loss with a generally good safety profile.
But it's not magic.
Definitely not. It's crucial to remember the nuances. It doesn't appear to be a magic potion for automatic muscle gain, especially when compared directly to just ensuring you get adequate calories from other sources based on that strict analysis we discussed. The benefits we do see consistently often appear tightly linked to consistent exercise.
That exercise factor keeps coming up.
It does, and we absolutely have to keep in mind the significant gaps in the research that these reviews highlighted, particularly the lack of data on body composition effects, specifically in women, from that rigorous analysis, and the need for more definitive comparisons between whey and other high-quality protein sources head-to-head under tightly controlled conditions for all these different outcomes.
It's truly fascinating, isn't it, how combining the data from many studies really reveals these conditions and specific effects. It's so much less about a simple yes, whey is good or no, it's bad, and much more about whey for what specific purpose, for whom, healthy.active, male, female, and under what circumstances, particularly regarding exercise.
Absolutely. And that recurring theme of incorporating it alongside consistent training seems crucial for seeing many of the positive results discussed, whether that's related to certain lipid markers or body composition like fat loss.
Yeah.
And what's also really revealing is how the limitations highlighted across these different high-quality reviews all point towards the same needs for future research. More precision, more rigor. The call for studies including women for better, more detailed reporting of overall diet and exercise habits, for clearer comparisons to other protein types. It shows that while we've learned a lot, especially about its potential role in supporting fat loss in regular exercisers and boosting average power, the full scientific picture is definitely still developing. We're refining our understanding, not closing the book.
So we've taken a really deep dive today into the scientific evidence on whey protein. We've examined its effects on those cardiometabolic health markers, on athletic performance parameters like average power, and on body composition in terms of fat mass and fat-free mass, drawing on these comprehensive systematic reviews and meta-analyses.
And we've seen that whey protein certainly can be a valuable tool for achieving certain health and performance goals, particularly when it's combined with regular exercise and consistent training. It shows good evidence for supporting fat loss and boosting average power output. And it might offer some potential improvements for certain lipid markers in healthy individuals under specific conditions.
But this deep dive, looking closely at the conditions and the comparisons, especially that isocaloric placebo comparison, it really leads us to a fundamental question, doesn't it? A question that applies not just to whey, but maybe to a lot of nutrition science.
I think it does.
We've seen these benefits linked to whey, sometimes quite clearly, like fat loss or the average power, but they often appear under conditions where protein intake is being increased, usually alongside an exercise program.
Exactly. So the really provocative question that lingers, the thing to mull over, is this. Are these observed benefits primarily due to unique properties that are specific to whey protein itself? Maybe its specific blend of amino acids, its famous fast absorption rate, or perhaps certain bioactive peptides within it? Or are these benefits largely a result of simply ensuring adequate overall protein intake as part of an active lifestyle?
Yeah.
Is it mainly about providing the necessary building blocks for your body to adapt to training, supporting muscle repair, maybe helping with satiety, which aids fat loss? Regardless of whether that protein comes specifically from a tub of whey powder or from other high-quality protein sources like casein, eggs, chicken, fish, lean meat, or various complete plant-based proteins.
And what does that potential distinction mean for your approach, for the listener's approach? As you think about optimizing your own health and performance goals, how much emphasis should you place on the specific type of protein supplement you choose? versus maybe prioritizing the bigger picture. Just ensuring you consistently get enough total high-quality protein throughout the day from a variety of whole food sources first, perhaps supplemented where needed, all as part of a well-rounded diet, and crucially, a consistent training plan.
It's definitely something worth thinking about, isn't it? How do you weigh the potential specific benefits of one supplement against the foundational importance of overall diet quality and consistency? Where does whey fit into your personal equation? It's something to consider as you navigate the role of protein in your own journey towards better health and performance.
Indeed, a lot to think about there. And that wraps up this deep dive into the science of whey protein.